Morning.
We were just really admiring your background, Drew.
Great background.
Yeah, this call will take place from work, so lots of shoes here.
Oh, you work at a running store.
You must like running.
Didn't know that.
Not just my personal collection.
You got the Boston jacket. I feel like that's the you can't disrespect me on my turf jacket.
Yes, something like that. I went to Boston and absolutely blew up. It was awesome.
You blew up, huh?
This was the year that at the start line was like 74 degrees after like training through the winter. And then like that was start 74, only got warmer from there. The only race in my life where I finished and like half of my face was sunburned because it was like a point to point and the sun was just there the whole time. And then had to spend, I think, about 2 hours in the medical tent, like waiting for my internal temperature to decrease. It was a great time. So I wear this jacket with pride because I did finish. I think I ran like a 3:23, was hoping for like a 2:40. And so I was pretty far off my goal, but I finished.
Great work. I'm sure there's more of a story to that, then we should get into that at a future time. Dealing with the just like the unfolding of the opposite of reaching your performance goals in the moment, always hard.
In climbing, there's the concept of like unsending something, like something that you've previously had a really good climb on. You go back to it and you're expecting to like send it again and you don't, and you unsend it. And I always think about that in terms of like I have a couple like mountain routes that I'll run several times throughout a summer. And there's always an unsend day where I go and I like run the slowest time ever on it.
I feel like that happens if you train enough.
Yeah,
it's just like inevitable.
You know, you're just always going to have like some, point on the scatter plot of training that's like not that great.
Well, hopefully,
or even racing.
Wishing everybody many PRs in this new year, at least new. I mean,
and self-compassion when you un-PR.
Yeah. Well, it's 2022. We haven't done a call yet, and we had a good break in terms of just taking some time off of these calls. And I know, at least according to Curb Your Enthusiasm, you're not supposed to say Happy New Year after something like January 7th.
Yeah, that's the
I guess
cutoff.
This is our official Happy New Year to you guys. I think I know that there's a lot going on, a lot of topics that we want to get to today, particularly like around COVID and some different wellness topics on that subject matter. It's definitely been, I think at least for me, like holidays did not go very well, very stressful. And it's kind of all.
And you got sick.
Yeah, and I got sick. And it's all kind of been leading.
But not COVID.
Not COVID, fortunately. Apparently not. The test said no.
I mean, the test said no and you had no COVID symptoms. You were barfing. It's a different thing. There are other sicknesses.
Yes. Well, anyways, I think at least for me, I've been feeling like things have kind of been kind of culminating or leading into what was a very challenging week for, I bet, a lot of coaches and people who support other people as their job. There's a lot happening out there, a lot of uncertainty. I know for everybody who is kind of in the Boulder area, I noticed in my logs kind of an uptick when the urban wildfires went through. I think that was at least for me, that was another just kind of eye-opening moment regarding climate change and stuff like that, which has been, just challenging to contemplate. For myself, I know Zoe and I have had a lot of conversations about that. But yeah, I think kind of the general message is like, it's okay if things are feeling tough, and it's definitely, if the holidays didn't go as planned or they didn't go well, don't worry, it's okay. Zoe and I had a lot of conversations about like, it's, Christmas, New Year's, they're just days in the calendar. We're giving them meaning and emphasis and expectation. And so we can also take that away. And I think that that's kind of important. I do kind of want to go around the horn a little bit and just kind of check in with all the coaches. That way you guys can kind of get a sense of where we're at, and then we'll kind of move into these questions. At least for me, holidays are tough. I ended up dropping out of a race and then dropped out of another race, which is my A race for the winter. Black Canyon, decided not to do that based on kind of how I've been feeling health wise and mentally. And that has brought a lot of relief for me, taking a lot of pressure off. So I'm kind of excited to, start the year not really worrying about races or exactly how well my training's going, and just kind of sinking into the habit of running every day and just seeing where that takes me. Zoe, what's your kind of perspective? Where are you at going into this year? I know I'm going to just call you out. Your stressed work has been tough. You've got a magazine that you're putting out here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, but that's pretty normal for me.
And a book.
The book is stressful.
Too, huh?
Yeah, I wish. I mean, I feel like I've been handling it quite well. It hasn't really affected my training or sleep or any kind of like measurement of health, other than, me just wanting to occasionally yell at anyone who misses their deadlines. We've had 2 freelancers get COVID.
So tough.
Pro tip, don't get COVID the week that your giant feature story is due. But that's like, I deal well with stress until I don't, but that is the job I've chosen. And I never use it as an excuse to miss training.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'd love to hear from Drew and Kylie and Sarah. Maybe we'll start off with Sarah, because I know her time's a little limited this morning.
Yeah. The holidays were, so I have a 5 and 7-year-old. So like nothing is probably better in terms of being a parent than Christmas time. We got to go meet Santa, and then we surprised our kids with a trip to Disney World. And so it was just like child magic for 2 straight weeks. And that's really lovely to be around and to be a part of and to like experience. And then we also my parents had their 50th wedding anniversary. We were supposed to have celebrated last year. And 29 out of 31 of our family members were able to be together. And that was huge. It's like the first time. It would have been great for all of us, but 2 people got COVID. So that was all really wonderful. But yeah, the fires are pretty much my community. And I was away during that time at Disney World. And that's like a real weird place to be emotionally, like, oh, my community's suffering. And I'm like in the happiest place on earth, right? So really struggled with that. And then ended up with flight delays that kept me away longer. So I've been home for a week now, and that feels better. But I would say like, yeah, it was just a real strange juxtaposition of like my own pleasure and the suffering of my community. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. And definitely, I felt like there was a lot of introspecting, at least for me, in kind of working through those fires and just how many close calls there were to people that we know. And also kind of in our extended kind of community of runners. It's well, anyways, Kylie, how are the holidays for you? What are you kind of like looking forward to going into this year?
Not very eventful for the holidays. Kind of just stayed around at Carbondale and got in some skiing and running, and then but this new year is exciting because I just my new coach, or my new dietitian, is also starting next week, and she's also a Microcosm athlete, Emily. So she'll be joining me, and it's going to be awesome because she's going to get a lot of athletes, and then I'm also going to be able to focus on some other. I'll be working with athletes still, but I can focus on some other projects too, like my book, which I'm excited about. That got approved, and then writing more for Zoe, and just doing some more fun projects this year.
That's great. Awesome. Congratulations on your book. I think that's a big deal. I think it's important, at least as a coach, I love to have, just like really specific, like books that offer, advice for athletes that I can refer back to. Kind of like, it would be great if there was like a Bible of like sports nutrition that I could, whenever I had a question I didn't already know an answer to, I could just open up the page and be like, oh, look at these great guidelines. Like, okay, here are some bullet points for you to like use on your next long run or whatever. Because there's already quite a bit of that out there in the running specific world. But I have yet to come, except for a great article on the Microcosm blog. I feel like there's not a lot of great like information out there other than what you're giving us, Kylie. So this is going to be really helpful.
It's
Just to say
interesting.
that her column for Trail Runner has been going for years, and it's very good.
All right.
It's one of our highest membership converters. So
it's actually pretty interesting. I had to do, for my proposal, I had to do like a research on other endurance sports nutrition books that are out there as competitors. And there's only like 1 to 2 other books that are written for endurance sports nutrition, like specifically
cool.
endurance sports nutrition. So I think it'll go over well. And it won't just be, like you were saying, running focused. It will have other sports included, like skiing, rowing, those sorts of things too.
Awesome. Drew, the busy dad.
Yeah, my everyone sounds like they had wonderful holidays, and I suppose I did too. So like Sarah, I have 2 kids, except mine are a little younger. I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old now. And so we would love to like travel and do things and go out and see people, but we're still kind of, I don't know if maybe we're like too careful or what the deal is, but my wife and I just don't feel comfortable having people over, including family. We don't really like big groups anyway. And we don't feel comfortable traveling. So our winter break was just a lot of family time at home, not doing a whole lot, which is not like us. Alicia and I love to travel and love to get as many stamps in our passport as possible, but it just hasn't happened the last couple of years and probably won't happen for a little while. So trying to come to terms with that and I guess refocus on time with family, especially the kids, and make sure that that's all good. So that's been like a refocus, I guess, for me this winter break, this holiday time. And then I guess I wrote down here trying to reclaim my run time. So I'm sure none of you follow me on Strava, but I am used to be anyway, like very active runner, had my own goals, all this stuff going on. But I feel like a lot of that took a backseat when we introduced a second child into the world. And so this year, my wife and I have come up with a plan for me to be able to run, 5 or 6 days a week and start to maybe prepare for some spring or summer events. So I'm really, really excited about that, both for my physical health and my mental health. So it's going to be awesome.
That's awesome, man.
Yay.
Yeah. And I think one of the highlights, at least for me, because I was kind of down and out on Christmas, we got to run with Drew once I was feeling better, and Megan and Dale too, who are in the Microcosm team. And that was just like great. We did like 3 runs with Drew over when we were in Arkansas.
Running with Drew's my favorite.
So even though apparently Drew hasn't been running consistently, he's still just
smoke
as
me
strong as ever.
I'm like Zoe's peak lifetime fitness, Drew at like not his peak lifetime fitness.
It's okay.
And coming from altitude.
Our long run last weekend, Zoe almost dropped me on a 15-miler. And I think that no disrespect, but that was eye-opening and definitely is getting me set up for success moving forward.
Well, it's that fatigue resistance, that ultra. When you race a 100-miler against a half marathoner, starts to get more miles go on.
Awesome. Well, I did want to take a couple minutes just to talk about, some of the, let's start kind of with the health and wellness side of this. I want to get Sarah's input on her perspective on dealing with the uncertainty that exists out there right now with regard to COVID. I know, at least for myself, Omicron sounds extremely contagious. The scientists are telling us that it is, and we're seeing that in the numbers of cases out there. And so just going to the store again feels a little anxiety inducing. Going into any social interactions, obviously, we have to really be calculated about that. And then, with regard to like group runs and or potential races that are happening here in the next couple of weeks. I've got an athlete doing the Hurt 100 this week, people doing Rocky Raccoon in a couple of weeks. And there's just like so much going on. Like, do we commit to these goals? Do we continue to move forward? How do we navigate the uncertainty? And I don't think there's any like one clear answer or formula for that, because it's uncertainty, right? So it's like, it involves like faith and belief. But I don't know if you guys follow Sarah on social media, but she put out a really great video a couple of days ago with some mental health tips to help kind of navigate the situation. Sarah, I'm wondering if you could just give us your kind of like professional opinion and maybe a couple of tips that people could use.
So not to be the bearer of bad news, but I think that possibly the best way to exist and move forward right now is to move towards a place of acceptance of the role that COVID is playing in our lives and will continue to be playing in our lives for some time. And I think even being aware of our language around talking about like normal and like before times and like when we get back to normal and things like that. Like my 5-year-old does not remember life before masks every day and limited social interactions and limited travel and all of that. And like this is becoming normal. And so I really think that doing some reflecting on that and like some personal like acceptance about what sort of changes have taken place in the last 2 years in your life and have become part of your new normal and those sorts of things. And like recognizing where you have resistance, like what are the things that bring you a lot of anxiety? What are the things that you continue to push back against, even though they've been here for some time or they are part of our, like that ambiguity about races, like that ambiguity has been there for a long time. And it's going to probably continue. Like every time we sign a waiver when we register for a race, probably forever, it's going to say something about COVID refunds, right? Like it's something that we have to think about that is going to be there. So I think that piece, like the acceptance piece in like terms of overall reducing anxiety would be a thing. And then, just also some acceptance that like if things feel overwhelming, that you're not alone. And that's we are in, like, how to say this? Like, I was saying we're like, we have to accept that this is normal moving forward, but right, the experiences that we've had over the last 2 years have impacted our nervous systems, impacted our stress, impacted our everyday life. And so if we are feeling overwhelmed all the time, that's not like a personal failure. That's a reasonable response to a huge change in our lives, to not being able to connect with people we used to be able to connect with, to not being able to travel the way we used to changes in holidays and all of that stuff. All of that has impacted us. And so if you're feeling upset or stressed or overwhelmed, like really separating that from you, like that's not like something you're doing wrong. That's understandable. And it makes a lot of sense. Right. And so thinking about what sort of self-care can you do in your everyday life to manage that stress, doing all of the things we talk about at Microcosm, eating and sleeping and getting that rest in, moving your body, meditation, mindfulness, connecting with others, connecting to a greater community, like all of those things you want to keep doing. And I would say like mindfulness practice being probably the one people do the least and the one that would have the biggest impact. So anything that you can do to increase the awareness that you have about what is happening internally, what's going on with your emotions, what's those questions that we ask, the 4-point check-in, like using some reflection time on that, like from a really mindful place. How tired am I? How fatigued am I? Like, what really is my mental, emotional place today? Like anything you can do to increase that awareness. Because if you're aware of it, you can manage it more easily. If you know what emotion's in front of you, you can better respond to it. I don't know if that helps or if there's anything else.
So
All of
great.
that, yeah.
Sorry, I was taking some notes. Really good tips there, Sarah. Thank you. You know, I can't overstate how important mindfulness practice is. If this isn't something that's part of your routine, I would say, you know, there's no time like the present to start building in, you know, 10 minutes of meditation a day, or working with a gratitude journal, and all of these kind of little things that you can use to kind of develop your awareness. And ultimately, like, I think the whole point of being mindful is just to give yourself more choices, I like to give yourself more freedom in moments of adversity. So when you're more mindful, stressful situations become less reactionary and more responsive. And that's really the key, having the choice to make, having the ability to make different choices when kind of under stress. And these are really stressful times. So the more choices that we have, the easier it's going to be to kind of navigate, these situations of uncertainty. I think particularly like kind of what pertains to all of us on this call, one, it's like dealing with committing to goals that we don't necessarily know are actually going to happen. And the other part of that is like, you know, dealing with, kind of like the day-to-day stress that we all have, because like things like going to the store are hard, and not having limited social interactions are hard. And those things and others can play, they work against us, especially with our mental capacity, and they can affect our energy levels and all of these things. They can induce anxiety. So, you know, in working towards those things, that mindfulness tool is going to give you a little bit more ability and awareness to make better choices during those tough times, particularly when it comes to training. That can be just the choice of like no longer feeling like you have to do the highest amount of like everything. It means like, yeah, you can do a couple miles less, and you feel better about that decision because it feels less reactionary. It's more like responsive to what you feel. Oh, I have 6 to 8 miles on my plan. I'm going to take a moment to reflect. I actually am feeling really tired. The better decision is to do 6 miles. And we want to give ourselves that opportunity. I mean, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot in my own training, as somebody who really likes to kind of maximize potential. And, you know, normally like an average run for me is 10 miles. And right now, an average run for me is probably closer to 8. Like I'm cutting every run I do shorter. That way I feel better when I finish. That's more in line with how stressed I feel kind of day to day. And in turn, that's actually helped me mentally kind of work through some of these mental blocks that I've had over the last couple of weeks, where I remember going into my next run, I remember, oh yeah, that last run didn't feel so bad. It felt really good. Like I didn't push myself to that place where it became a mental strain to get through it. And so finishing the runs, you know, feeling better is going to help you get out the next day. And I've kind of seen in my logs, I know that Zoe and I have talked a lot about this, but the holidays were tough. A lot of people got off plan. That's fine, but we want to do what we can now to get back into our habits. That way, if our goals do happen, which I am, you know, feeling really optimistic that summer races will happen. I mean, they've been basically happening since 2020 in Colorado. So it's likely those races will happen. So you've got to make those daily investments in yourself now, so that way you're prepared in the future. And so
And
great.
then,
Yeah,
like,
Zoe.
the worst case scenario is you become a better runner.
Yes.
That's a great worst case scenario, right? Like, you become a better runner, but you like don't get a free t-shirt. Fine. That's a great outcome. And I think something that I saw a lot over the holidays is I would have an athlete miss a run and they would experience an emotional reaction, like of shame or of feeling bad, of not enough. And then they wouldn't check into their log. And that missed run became 2 missed runs. And then that became double the shame. And then those 2 missed runs became 4, became, oh my God, I'm doing my first run of 2022 on January 8th. And I'm going to come in hot with a log entry that's 800 words. And oh my God, I've dug myself in a hole. Every day you have the opportunity to not keep digging. Make that choice to not let one day become 2 days, become 4 days, become a whole year, right? Like, inertia is super real and you always have the opportunity to turn things around. Don't let one bad day or one tired run become a series of poor decisions. Let that become a chance to reinvest in the future, not one to get down on yourself. And this is something we see a lot with athletes, is people are really hard on themselves. They'll miss a run and that'll cause kind of a shame spiral. And it's very hard to run your way out of a shame spiral. And most people will just dig their heels in and continue to rest and get deeper and deeper and deeper in that shame spiral. Use that as a cue to turn things around and change something up rather than go deeper and deeper into that hole.
Thank you. Gosh,
we saw a lot of that
so well.
January 10th was like a lot of people that are like, well, I've already messed up my New Year's resolution. And it's like,
yeah,
every day you had the choice to make a different decision.
So Sarah, she mentioned that, sticking to like kind of those wellness things that really help. She highlighted nutrition and she highlighted sleep. We've talked about sleep until literally we're blue in the face over here, but I do want to turn this to Kylie for a minute. Kylie, are there any kind of nutrition tips that you would recommend for athletes, just involving like helping to keep their immune system strong, kind of just supporting, better overall energy in a time where at least I feel like my energy is a little bit lower because of stress? Do you have like any recommendations for the athletes?
Yeah, so I think one of the most common things, and it sounds so simple when I'm talking to athletes, but I encounter this very, very frequently, is just number one, not having yourself on like a regular planning schedule for your like meals and snacks and grocery shopping. And I know it can kind of, again, sound trivial or really simple, but the athletes that don't do that tend to not be very intentional with their fueling. And then they're just grabbing things that might be in the cabinet or the fridge and not really paying attention to what they're doing. So even just starting with like carving out 20 to 30 minutes every week on a certain maybe day, or like I usually have people have a day and then a backup day in case they, weren't able to do it that first day, can be really helpful. And I think reframing the idea of people get intimidated by the word like meal prep or planning, like meal planning, because they think it has to be like 10 hours a day on like a Sunday to do their prep for the week. Reframing what that looks like for you. So if you're really busy on weekends, maybe your planning should actually take place at lunchtime on a Wednesday or in the evening on a Thursday, and planning for that next week in the middle of the previous week. And then, if you don't have a lot of time, I work with athletes that literally do not cook for themselves. They have everything is delivered, meal delivery. So there really isn't, in my mind, there are ways to, if you're super busy, to still get in your regular fueling. And whether that is, realizing that you're really busy and it's okay to offload some of that onto a meal delivery service. One tip that I got from a coach that I work with is, trying to offload some of those stressors and that kind of impact your life and are hindering your ability to kind of move forward onto someone else that it might give them like a job, or, the meal delivery thing would allow for you to fuel yourself properly, and you wouldn't have to worry about the cooking. Or I had an athlete hire a cleaning person because it allowed for them to like not feel stressed of having a dirty house. So thinking about like what things maybe stress you out and you say you don't have enough time for, and then maybe offloading some of that to, you know, wherever, another service or someone else. And I've kind of tried to do that a little bit with like some meal delivery type things myself, and I'm a dietitian, and it really helps a lot. And not being ashamed of that. And sometimes people are ashamed because they feel like they need to do everything. And I think it's okay, you know, give yourself some grace. You don't have to do everything. And then, so kind of, you know, that planning, shopping piece, do online grocery order pickup. That's another way to kind of save time and money for a lot of people. And then setting up some like meal windows for yourself. So I don't call typically, like I work with a lot of athletes that are like paramedics, nurses, surgeons, don't have regular schedules. So think about like meal 1, 2, 3, try to get in 3 meals as a baseline, and then kind of setting up like ranges of time that you'll try to get something in. And if you have to set up alarms or reminders at first to remind yourself, then go to that extreme, you know? So getting yourself into that regular habit of fueling yourself. And then, like I said, like being okay with, you know, if you need a meal delivery service or you need frozen meals for like a lunch, like you can find healthy, balanced frozen meals, and that's okay to use those as a tool. So that's kind of where, you know, working with people at first, I really like for them to get in those 3 meals a day to fuel yourself regularly, keep blood sugar balance, get in a routine of planning out your week, planning out your shopping, and how are you going to make that work? And then moving, I mean, it gets more like in depth from there, but that I feel like that's a good starting place for people, you know, in the new year here. If you're not used to, if like stress is causing you to not eat, or stress is causing you to feel like you are eating all the time as well, like that might not be the best for you either. So kind of evaluating where you're at with your eating pattern and trying to dial that into a more like a little bit more structured or intentional fueling strategy.
Awesome.
Love
Yeah. So many good tips. I know that like something that, yeah, Zoe and I talk a lot about is like meals can be challenging because there's a decision-making process that takes place around, well, what do we find to cook? And after a day full of making a lot of decisions, that can sometimes become a point of stress. And so, you know, we really like using Purple Carrot. We get 3 meals a week out of that. It, you know, it doesn't come pre-prepared.
But like, I actually love cooking. Like,
yeah,
that's my happy time. Grocery shopping, not my happy
right.
time.
And
like that's what, like, especially living in a
Mhm.
small ass town, like good luck finding okra in rural Colorado. It's impossible. And as a Southern woman, okra, critical staple of my diet. And I love being able to like make the decision of like outsourcing a certain amount and like having the privilege of outsourcing a certain amount of labor to a meal, like basically like the meal prep delivery service. Cause then I still get to like spend that fun time cooking, and I still get to like pick out the recipes that are being sent, but I'm just offloading the part of the labor that I like really hate, which is trying to, again, find nutritional yeast in a rural city market. Not always great. And they keep hiding the tamari.
That's really key, because I think if I was left to my own kind of devices, I would
eat pasta.
Yeah, I wouldn't like go through the same routines that Zoe does regarding nutrition. That's, you know, something for me that like isn't quite as sticky of a habit, I would say.
I love cooking.
And I don't like making decisions after my workday is over. So for me, the great thing about having that meal delivery service is that like, I don't have to, you know, decide what to cook. It's just there. And so then I follow the recipe. I also noticed like Kylie mentioned.
Make a note on, you know, like the privilege thing that Zoe was saying, like Yeah, I do. I think that it is, for a lot of us, it is a privilege to be able to buy those sorts of, or invest into those meal delivery service programs. But there are other ways, like if you aren't financially, that if you can't really afford something like that, like I said, there are like healthy frozen meal options that you don't need to be ashamed about buying. Or like getting yourself into, maybe if you don't need a lot of variety, I like the suggestion in the comments about doing like a big crock pot dish of something and then having that multiple times. So you still take some of that decision fatigue out of the equation. So I just want, before we moved on, I want to make sure that we touch on that, because it's not that like everyone needs to go do a meal delivery service, because it can be pricey. So keeping in mind there's other ways to kind of streamline meal planning and eating.
Totally. I've actually felt like for us, it's been really cost effective.
Yeah.
Especially with kind of the sourcing of harder to find like vegan options and
Not a lot
like
of seitan.
Yeah, like critical ingredients for us to make sure that we can get the protein and things that we need. But it really depends on kind of like the part of the country you live in. Like the cost of living is really high here, so the prices at the grocery store are already quite inflated. So like the difference between like getting 3 meals with Purple Carrot versus like 3 meals from the store, I mean, it's like almost exactly the same.
I would almost I believe sometimes it saves us money, particularly because I'm not overbuying on rand. I'm not like, oh my God, the only amount of barley they're selling is like a silly amount of barley. And yeah.
Yeah. And again, I'll piggyback off of what Kylie was mentioning about, or what Rebecca said about the crock pot dishes, cooking once and then having 2 or 3 meals to eat afterwards is really key. That's a big key to ensuring that like Zoe and I are always eating healthy meals throughout the day and during the week, because like we don't have time to cook like full on cook lunch. So like
if someone has full on time to cook lunch,
people
like
do.
You're amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome, but like that doesn't work for us. So, like leftovers works for us.
I love leftovers.
Yeah.
I made a giant, we have literally like an industrial sized cast iron skillet that I filled with tofu stew last night. And now we have a bucket of tofu stew to eat all weekend.
I don't know if it'll last that long. I've been pretty hungry lately and I got my appetite back after being sick. Well, cool. Yeah. So a lot of like what we're kind of seeing as coaches and what like we're hearing, Kylie just like, she really spelled it out, when she said like sticking to a schedule. And how do you stick to a schedule where you have to kind of have like a system in place and you have to have really ingrained habits. And so like, it's very often like as coaches, we see the first things that kind of go away when stuff is tough. It's like self-care goes away. Eating well is kind of part of that. It goes away. Sleep maybe falls off and training falls off. And often that's not because the habit, the systems that support going out and doing those things, they need work. They need help. You need help developing those systems so they're stronger, so they don't go away when things are challenging. And that is kind of like one of the key topics that we like really wanted to discuss today, particularly because everything is so uncertain, especially with these upcoming winter races that a lot of our athletes are doing. How do we stay grounded in our training? How do we maintain like the process day to day, working towards those goals, even if they aren't going to happen? How do we do that? And it's all about the habits.
Yeah, I think, particularly if you're someone who's worried, like if, you had a goal on the schedule and you found out, and this is something that like, I think is like not as likely as it has been in the past in terms of race cancellations. It could happen. I had an athlete who had a race that was canceled this week. But if the only reason you're getting up in your training is because you have a goal, then you need to reassess what your systems are. Like if your habits are only responding to a goal, then you need to develop better habits. That's not the fault of the goal. That's the fault of your habits. And so if like you found out you had a race get canceled, or like if you're feeling less motivated because things are uncertain, then you need to reassess where your motivation is coming from anyway.
Yeah, there is a good quote. I can't remember what that author is because I haven't read the book yet, but I was listening to a podcast earlier in the week, and it was something along the lines of like, you don't rise to the level of your goals, but you actually fall to like the level of your systems, or how established your systems are. And so I think that just speaks very directly to kind of what we're trying to establish at Microcosm with everybody's running, and the reason why we do daily check-ins for accountability. But so much more of this, especially this time of year, and one of the big reasons why like I've been very focused to do a little bit less in my training is because starting smaller is really where the habit begins. So really taking this big idea, I want to run 100 miles, but I'm inconsistent. I want to run 100 miles, but I haven't trained in 3 months. We have these big goals, right? But we have to create a system in which every single day we can do very small things to work towards these bigger goals. And so, the way to really help yourself along is to do a bit less every day, but to focus on the consistency rather than inconsistently very intense efforts. Because the intensity, especially in running, as we've talked about a lot in the past, often leads to injury. But when you're consistent and you do just a little bit, that often leads to stronger adaptations and less time dealing with injury. So if you're kind of struggling, if you're one of my athletes who've been struggling with consistency, you might have noticed that I've like probably reduced your training quite a lot. And I know a lot of athletes did, like they were ramping up all through the fall, and then the holidays came and you didn't run for 3 weeks. I mean, I had athletes who didn't do a run for 3 weeks. And so you've got to reestablish the habit at that point. And so that starts by looking at things through a kind of like a smaller lens. That might be 20 minutes of running a day to reestablish the habit and to give yourself a daily goal that's very easily achievable, rather than, well, your goal is to do the volume that you're doing before, 8 miles today. And that's overwhelming.
Totally. And I think, something we see a lot here with people wanting to establish newer goals, like one of my big things in 2021 was after I had a hip injury, was I was going to be a lot more consistent with my hip strengthening and overall strengthening. And my goal wasn't to do an hour of strength 2 times a week, or to like go to the gym or get big. It was to do 15 minutes of strength 4 times a week, which is super easy to do. And like, I was actually blown away by how strong I felt and how like much it helped my running. And what we see a lot is we have athletes that are like, I'm going to commit to strength training. They'll go to the gym, or they'll like buy a kettlebell and they'll do a high intensity interval workout that they found on the internet or that some influencer sold them. And they'll be super sore, and then they won't strength train again. Or they'll do that, they'll repeat that same thing like once a week or twice a week. And it's not really helping their running in any meaningful way, because they go so hard that they get tired, or they get sore, or they just don't like it. And they mistake the benefits of intensity for the benefits of consistency. In my strength training, one of the reasons I know it's effective is because I am rarely sore, but also rarely injured. And a lot of times we see people looking for validation in feeling sore and feeling wrecked and leaving the gym hobbling. And that is actually a lot less beneficial than leaving the gym or like doing body weight stuff and being like, oh, I feel good afterwards. Like particularly for running, that is how we want and need to feel, because the strength should always support your running, not take away from it.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like using strength training as an illustrator for kind of building out these habits and systems and making sure that they end up being consistent, things that we practice a few times a week. And when it comes to strength, we've seen what is really effective, like the David Roche 3-minute mountain legs. There are literally hundreds of people having success in their strength training off of a 3-minute routine.
With no weight, by the way,
with no weight.
Like, I see so many, again, athletes that are like, oh, I just signed up for this sick mountain race. I'm going to do David's routine but 3 minutes doesn't seem like it's enough. So I'm going to hold a 20-pound weight and I'm going to do it for 8 minutes. And then I'm going to be wrecked and I'm going to hate it. And I'm actually going to tank my running economy and I'm actually going to tear my hamstring. And oh no, it's literally better to do a 3-minute workout 4 times a week with less weight than to go ham and then not actually help yourself at all. And I think that it's so easy when you're starting a habit, people are like, well, I really want to start meditating, but 10 minutes, that can't be effective. I've got to sign up for a retreat and I've got to join a gym and I need to get a meditation coach. And they go way too big rather than just being oh, can I meditate for 10 minutes, 5 times a week?
Or for 1 minute.
For 1 minute, literally a 1 minute, 3-minute mindfulness practice, just sitting in your car before you go into work every day. Whatever is easiest for you to do is actually a better habit than thinking I'm going to change my life and I'm going to go vegan and I'm going to start meditating and start doing strength training. Start way smaller. I see so many people just go way too freaking big. And then that makes it impossible for them to actually establish the habit. The best case scenario is 12 weeks into your new habit. You're oh my gosh, that's so easy. Should it be harder? You should always feel you could do more. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that if you can hold anything for, I don't know, a significant amount of time, that's a lot. Any habit, strength, meditation, running. For me, it's cleaning and doing laundry on time. I need the most boring habits in my life, but
Yeah.
I think we all suffer from going way too big and then doing something that we can't reasonably sustain. I would rather you think you could do more than do too much.
Here's another example of going too big with your running goals. I want to run X number of miles this year.
Don't do that. That's a bad goal, man.
It's a really, and I see smiles, I see laughs on the screen. Yes, some people, but a lot of people set those yearly mileage goals, and that goal is very hard to achieve if right now you're not even running 5 days a week.
And it doesn't actually help you long-term. Running,
right.
We always see around the thousands, your body doesn't give a shit what a mile is. It has no idea. You've literally just picked a random ass number. Let's say you exceed, let's say your goal is to run 2,000 miles. Are you going to be disappointed if you overshoot it by 8 miles? No. Are you just but at the end of the year, I had so many athletes can you change my training so I can get these extra 25 miles in? I'm you're actually adding more acute stress now. Why weren't you thinking about this in July? Why weren't you actually prioritizing this consistency when it mattered? And now suddenly it's January and you're trying to hike on the treadmill. This is so dumb and stupid. And again, your body has no clue what a mile is.
No, it doesn't, but it does know about those acute
stresses. It does know about stress. It's oh, I'm stressed.
So again, just to kind of get back to the point, we want to establish smaller goals. They need to take place on a daily basis. When we think about these yearly things or these big race goals, it's really the daily practice that leads to that. We talk a lot about this, and another way to kind of illustrate this is when we look at a race. I'm going to go race this weekend, and I want to run a 4-hour 50K. Well, that's awesome. That's a great goal. Super cool that you've given yourself a performance goal, but why don't we take a step back? Why don't we see what are the actual goals that realistically lead to a performance goal? And we've called those process-oriented goals in the past, the small stepping stones that bring you into the present moment, that then when you do constantly over the course of a race, set you up for that performance goal. And we really want to look at our daily training and habit forming in that exact same way. Every day, if your goal is to run 10 miles a week, whatever you kind of are thinking up in your head, well, that starts with what you're doing today. So how do you make that easy for yourself? You put your shoes out, in front of the door. So your shoes are there and it's a cue to run early in the morning. Or often I see, and I have been telling this to a lot of athletes recently, if you want to reestablish your running routine, run in the morning, run first thing in the morning, make it the first thing that you do. Don't wait until the afternoon after you're tired, after you've done a bunch of other things. Make the effort, sleep in your running clothes. So you wake up and you're already ready to go. And there's no excuse not to go and do that 20 minutes. You're already prepared. You've set yourself up for success with that preparation. If we wait until the end of the day to run, if you don't already have that routine established, it's going to be a lot harder to get out there. I see a lot of athletes missing runs because of that. Another kind of way to illustrate this is a year or two ago, Zoe and I started to realize we needed to eat more protein. And so we needed to change
Thanks, Kylie.
our protein intake habits. And that's really difficult for two people who already have like a well-established like eating routine. And so, you know, we had to like really commit to the process of adding extra protein into our diets. So like what we did was, instead of like buying this cereal, like we literally like replaced the cereal with granola. So like the only option in the morning was a higher protein option. You know, we did that a lot with like our dinner meals too, where it's like at the store, you know, instead of buying one thing of tofu, we decided like, okay, we're going to buy two.
However much, how many like whatever the quantity of tofu that a recipe recommends, we added an extra package of tofu.
Right. And so like, we just added like one small thing into an existing like routine that was already established. And then, you know, over a few months and like over a couple of years now,
protein supplementing.
Right. And like over a couple of years now, like it's become like the default. And
like our diet hasn't changed. We don't look any, like, it's not like it wasn't a huge change. It was just like slightly different morning like giving ourselves more options, a little more protein in the morning, a protein rich snack in the form of a shake supplement thing. And then making sure that our dinner just had like about 30% more protein, because a lot of the recipes we cook from aren't necessarily like for athletes or whatever. And so just like baking in protein to the places we were already eating, so that we're not like, oh my God, I never eat protein, I have to like revisit, like we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just like padding the wheel out with like a bit more of what we need.
Yeah. And I think that was, you know, rather effective. It was a small change that had, you know, really big impacts over time. And again, like that's what all this stuff is about. Like if you really want to be a great runner, you have to make a small investment into your running future every day and repeat that, you know, month after year, and just so on and so forth. You know, I was talking about this with an athlete recently who felt like they weren't getting fast enough, and they've really only been training for 2 years. And I, you know, in the rare moment I use myself as an example, I've trained for 7 years to get the speed that I have today. That's an investment of time. 2 years isn't that much, you know, comparatively. We really have to adjust the time scale we're looking at and using to, you know, make these comparisons and set our expectations for ourselves. Start smaller, make sure those habits are ingrained, and then you level up on them. That's the sequence that we need. You know, we build a foundation of aerobic miles before we ever add intensity onto an athlete in the form of hills or strides. You know, we don't do workouts until we've done hills or strides first. You know, we're building those little steps that then you can level up on over time. And then eventually, you know, you get to run that race that you wanted to do or do a big adventure. Anyways, we've been talking a lot. Kylie is also an expert in habit building because she really does do this with her nutrition clients. Drew and Sarah also really knowledgeable. I would just love to hear what some of your guys' tips are. You know, we haven't really mentioned at all like the self-compassion kind of piece that is important in this, using your inner coach to kind of support you when you fall off track rather than, you know, reverting to negative self-talk and things like that. Yeah, can I open it up to you guys a little bit? I'm not sure who would like to speak. Sarah?
Yeah, I just thought I'd like using the examples that you were just giving. I think it's good to think about just like what that's telling us about human nature and the brain. And like, right, it isn't like successful people have amazing willpower, or like successful people are able to resist temptation when they're feeling emotional. It's that when somebody's in a place of rational thinking, they set themselves up for success later. So it's knowing that we're all going to have times where we have temptation or where our willpower isn't what we want it to be. And that's okay. There's not like, so I think again, just that self-compassion piece, and like, it's very easy when we don't meet our New Year's resolutions to think that we're bad at meeting goals or that we don't have the willpower, we don't have the determination, and we're not motivated. And it's really like has nothing to do with who we are as people. It just has to do with whether or not when we were in a logical place and we were feeling motivated and all of that, that we use that energy to set ourselves up for success. So I just think that piece, like if you aren't meeting your goals, it has nothing to do with who you are as a person, or you're not missing something fundamentally. It's really just a strategy thing. So have compassion for yourself around that.
Totally. Like successful people aren't good at being perfect. They're good at anticipating and being aware of their own imperfections and acting accordingly.
And they have really strong systems to support that. So that way, if they're not feeling motivated or something kind of in their environment is maybe affecting what they want to accomplish, it's also very easy for them to continue to stay on track. And that is really fundamental. I mean, we've talked about motivation with so many athletes. We've done so many calls on it. And we often are like, winter, how do we motivate to go out in the winter? It's so cold. It's like, well, it's not motivation. It's having a very systematic approach and a habit that is so well established that you're always grabbing your shoes and going out the door. You don't care what the temperature is or if it's snowing outside.
Yeah.
I mean, it really comes down to a description as simple as that. It's the habit is there, so you do it. And that habit is formed with a lot of small, very small steps over a long time.
And not being hyper rigid. Something in the podcast I shared with Brene Brown on our Facebook page, James Clear said that like each decision you make is a vote for the kind of person you want to be, right? And like in any election, you're going to have votes cast for the other side. Like you're going to have days where the PT doesn't happen, the strength training doesn't happen, you don't get the run in. You're allowed to have imperfect days, and actually having too rigid a mindset is what leads to people falling off the bandwagon. Like it's okay to have a day where you don't enter in the log, but you have that next day to make a different choice, to vote for the kind of person who is consistent about logging the runs, who's consistent about getting the run in, consistent about getting the PT in. So don't let, again, one bad decision become two. You just, you had one vote cast for the kind of person that you don't want to be. That's fine. Make the next day something different.
Oh man. And your goals also should be thought of in that same way. When you choose your goal, you should be visualizing, does this goal help assist me on the path to being who I want to be? Does this help me identify with who I am and where I want to go? I like that identity. I'm gonna have to listen to that. I haven't listened to that podcast.
You have to listen to it. It's gonna blow your mind. I was
so
listening to
key.
it. So like the way that Zoe strength training, so proud because like I am not a strength training like person, but the way I convince myself to do is I only allow myself to listen to audiobooks I like when I strength train, or listen to podcasts I like when I strength train. So that like incentivizes me to do it. TJ came in when I was listening to the Brene Brown podcast while doing my strength training about habit building. And he was just like, who invited Brene to Microcosm? She's spilling all of our beans over here. So it's a really good podcast and everyone should listen.
Yeah, super good. Kylie, before we run out of time, maybe, as somebody who is also really active in, I think, a really tough, just like sector with nutrition and getting people to build their habits there. I'd love to hear a little bit from you before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I think Zoe really touched on it when she was talking about the strength training goals and how people want to maybe make those goals like go all in at the beginning. And so I find that with the athletes that I work with, a lot of them, they want to go all in with their nutrition, but I kind of have to dial them back. And what I usually ask is, on a scale of 1 to 10, like how achievable realistically over the next week, how achievable is this for you? And 10 being like, yes, 100% I can achieve it. And if it's a 9 or a 10, then okay, go for it. But if it's not, if it's below that, then I would suggest adjusting the goal. And then also figuring out, not setting too many goals at one time. So like 1 to 3 is pretty much the max that you should be setting for yourself at one time. And they've actually done some studies on this that, if somebody sets one goal for themselves over a week period of time, their level of like achievability of it is like 90 some percent. And then after that, if you have 2 goals, then it goes down to like 40 or 30%. And then if you have 3 goals, it goes down to like 10%. So the more goals you set, the less likely you're going to be able to achieve all of those goals. And so thinking about, do I really want to set up all these goals at one time? Or do I just want to, start small, do like a singular goal that I know I can achieve, and then build on that momentum. And then that creates the habit and I call it skill stacking. So habit and lifestyle changes for fueling or running, running related as well.
Yeah, that sequencing of how we introduce those goals is really, really important. I think, in a running context, that's why we don't want to start with the 100-miler. We really want to start with smaller, more achievable distances that then we can use as stepping stones to help us get towards this greater goal. Yeah, I think it's so important to kind of visualize how that works, to understand, and in good coaching, often the coach is going to kind of present that path forward for you. In your plan, you're going to see the direction things are going, or they're going to explain that to you so you can understand it and visualize, here I am today, here's where I want to be tomorrow, here are some of the steps in between that we're going to make to help establish this through, again, it's very small steps every day rather than these big, like, kind of leaps. Well, great. And I think, maybe just in kind of in finishing up the call, I think around this time of year, we're all thinking about establishing new goals and stuff, and routines, whether it's adding some strength in or being more consistent, or you're working towards, a bigger goal that you've been leveling up for many years. That's all awesome. This kind of time with all the uncertainty with COVID and stuff like that, it's a big test of your habits. It's a big test of your systems. Let's use this as an opportunity to kind of build awareness around what's working and what's not. And if things aren't working, try to take a step back to reestablish the habit or the system so that it's stronger. That way, when things are tough and you're questioning what you're doing, the default is still to continue doing the things that bring you joy. Ideally, those things are rooted in strong systems and really great habits, because often, mentally and emotionally, we do need those things to help us during times like this. Those moments of joy throughout the day are, I think, at least for me, are really, really helpful. That's why I try to go on my runs. That's why I try not to do too much. I just try to do the amount that feels really good. And I don't judge, and I try working really hard not to judge doing a little bit less if I need to. And I hope that also resonates with you guys, as I see so many people are on our team really want to do the most that they can and maximize that potential. And I think sometimes that looks a little bit like doing a little bit less. Well, thank you guys. That's all the time that we've got for the morning, but we will be back on Friday next week. And yeah, we're going to get to some training questions that we didn't talk about today. And yeah, maybe some more topics that are kind of relevant to everything that's going on out there. So hope you all stay safe and healthy. And if you've got questions for future calls, ideas, topics, please, you know how to reach us. We really appreciate those emails. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.